Welcome to Three Takes. I'm Ishana.
I'm Manali.
I'm Mona.
Three women.
Three generations.
One family, unpacking the questions we all ask.
Welcome back to Three Takes. Today, I'm super excited because we're doing something a little bit different. Normally, everyone is used to having me, my mom, and my sister giving our three takes on different questions and topics. But today, I wanted to bring in two of my very close friends, and we have Rachel and Charlotte. And the reason they're here today for this episode is that now that it's 2026, I am officially getting married. So far for me, the wedding planning process has been really exciting, but also overwhelming and emotional. And sometimes all of these emotions happen in the same day. And Rachel and Charlotte both have gone through the ups and downs of wedding planning. And so really just wanted to tackle this question and idea of how do you really survive the wedding planning process. So welcome, Charlotte and Rachel. Maybe just to start, do both of you want to tell me a little bit about your wedding planning process, where you got married, what type of wedding it was, just to give some context?
Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte. My situation is a little unique. My husband is Indian. I'm white, grew up in the United States. He grew up in India, and we met in college in Pittsburgh. So we ended up having two weddings, one in Pittsburgh in June, and then one in India over Thanksgiving time, about, 4 or 5 months later? Yeah, both in 2024. So yeah, I guess we'll dive into my feelings about those weddings and the planning process. So I'll pass it over to Rachel.
All right. Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks, Ishana. I'm Rachel. I got married outside of Paris in 2025, June 2025. My wedding was a Jewish wedding, and we did it at a chateau. Again, we'll dive into all of the fun, but we tried to keep it a bit smaller of a wedding. So all in, we had about 70 guests, but it was a great time.
Amazing. And I should tell the listeners that I was able to attend all three of these weddings, and all of them were super, super fun. And I feel like, honestly, being a guest is like really fun at your close friends' weddings. And I don't know, maybe you guys feel like as hosting a wedding, sometimes there's like a lot of things you have to do, but 10 out of 10 weddings for both of you. You guys kind of mentioned like how there were different cultural considerations you had to take into consideration, location, all of that too. I feel like when we're talking about surviving the wedding process, there's a lot of different things to take into consideration. I know right now for me, it's like we went through the location process, then what's the actual venue? What are our budget constraints? And then taking in cultural differences as well. Could you guys kind of tell your experience in terms of like how you and your partner went through where, what, and how?
Ishana, that's a big question.
I know it's a big question. So literally like whatever, like I guess if we start with just like, maybe Charlotte, if we start with you, like, okay. Did you know off the bat that there were going to be two separate weddings?
So we went to your sister's wedding, of all things, before we got engaged. And having gone to that, we had the mindset of, oh my gosh, there's no way you could replicate the magic of this moment twice. How are we going to do one wedding with the constraints that we also want to stick to? So we were really conflicted about that. That was one of the first weddings we had gone to, like hitting like the wedding season age. And we were kind of worried about that. And that was your first
Indian wedding that you attended too, right?
Yeah. Okay. That was the first Indian wedding I'd been to. Okay. So starting off strong, attending your sister's. So I had that in the back of my head. And then when we got engaged, we were a little confused whether we do one or two. I feel like we quickly realized we'd do two, but maybe unintentionally stressed out our parents a little bit more than we needed to, just because like one set of parents was brainstorming more so than the other set of parents off the bat. So we needed to get them to the same playing field. And then once we decided we were doing two, then it came to like, which one are we doing first? And there was like importance around that for different people. Then after we figured that stuff out, then I feel like we got some pros and some benefits of like splitting it up, because I feel like we were faced very head on at the beginning with like our two cultures coming together and like what are we going to do and like making decisions as like two families coming together at the beginning. But then by having to, people kind of fell into place more easily and there was less disagreeing on things. I guess that's kind of vague, but
No,
I'm trying not to like put my foot in my mouth either.
No, I think that makes sense. Even, being Indian myself and getting married to an Indian person, like it's great culturally that we come from the same traditions. But even within that, there's like differences, me being North Indian, him being South Indian, that I feel like we have to have conversations about. Rachel, what about for you, like in terms of deciding like with your partner, what type of a wedding you wanted, where it was going to be, etc.?
For the what type, it was really important for my husband that we do a traditional Jewish wedding. And I think had you have asked me maybe like 3 years ago, Rachel, you can have a Jewish wedding. I mean, I am Jewish, so look for starters. It's not like we just did this. But for me, I mean, I'm not like a very religious Jew, but it was super important for him. And hindsight being 2020, I'm so glad we had a religious ceremony. I think in this day and age, every person is different, but I think for me, it was really important that their ceremony be like a meaningful moment that was like rooted in religion tradition. And I think it made it that much more special, especially probably 95% of the people at our wedding were not Jewish. So it was cool to like show all my friends this culture that they're not as familiar with. And in terms of choosing the location, that really came down to, it was kind of just like, why not? People keep saying, why Paris? I said, why not Paris? But we both grew up in Southern California. Then my parents have relocated now. They're outside of Atlanta. So we have family and friends in California, folks in Atlanta, and then most of our friends, Ishana, as you know from college, have all relocated to the Northeast. So we had so many different regions already to consider that we kind of like, why not just go to Europe if we're going to do it in the summer? Let's have a Euro summer. So that's how we landed on France.
Okay, cool. So it seemed like, Rachel, like, did you know Paris? Why not, I guess, like other places in Europe?
I feel like I was not the most like bride, however you want to take that. But I didn't enter my bridal era with all of these like expectations or like, I need this and that. And I think even if we would have talked about this years ago and you would have been like, where do you see yourself getting married at? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
There was only one venue ever that I thought to myself like years ago, oh, if I was going to get married at this place, like it's a museum in Paris. And of course we got engaged. And the day after we got engaged, I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to email this Parisian museum and see if they would entertain us getting married there, to which they were like, no. So I said, okay, try that. I even went back to them and I pushed back and they still said no. But alas, that had kind of like been the starting point of like, oh, international, like maybe that's an option. Maybe Paris is an option. Why no other city in Europe? I mean, I really don't have a good answer for that, but I think it was kind of just Paris, and that museum was already on my mind. And, it is such a romantic city. I think that played into it. And we did look at venues because I think that a big thing in the last maybe year or two is a lot of people are doing destination weddings because they are quote unquote like more cost effective. We can get into that. I don't necessarily know if it's if it's that much more cost effective.
Yeah, it's like for who, the guests or the host?
Exactly. So yeah, debatable on that front. Definitely a really cool, unique way to do it. But the one thing, as we were looking, we've been to weddings in Provence and other parts of like the south of France. And we did know that if we were going to make people schlep to Europe, like we needed to be near a major city because just the logistics and saying to friends and family, hey, please fly, like 8 to 10 hours. And then, oh, by the way, take a train for another 4 hours. I feel like that is just a lot, especially like we had friends that came in on a Thursday night and left on Sunday. So that also played into it. And that's why we kind of chose like a major city. But
I think is like so true, because I think when my fiance and I were thinking about that first stage of like where and like the date and stuff too, I think like we like the idea of a destination wedding, but like we were taking in most of the people at our wedding as our friends. And frankly, like we're all still in that early stage of career where like taking a ton of time off is like really hard. And I think we felt guilty to ask for it. And so we were kind of like, for us, like India doesn't make sense because I don't know if people can really take that much time off. But Charlotte, I'm curious, because you guys had 2 different weddings. Your husband is also like from India. I guess just like venue itself, and then you had done a lot for your guests as well. So like knowing that everyone was like coming to the Indian wedding at least, like did you feel like it was like a lot of pressure because you had already done a wedding and then now there's like a second wedding and then it's like super far. A lot of people are coming from the States. Like was that a mental challenge or logistical challenge?
I think because I knew the weddings would be so different, I wasn't concerned about having a second after the first. I think for context, and I won't be specific about our budgets or whatnot, but like for respect to one another, Pittsburgh wedding, budget a lot smaller. Beautiful wedding, more intimate, but just like smaller budget. Indian wedding, a little bit balls to the wall.
Yeah.
So I felt more comfortable too going from like smaller budget wedding to then following
bigger.
up with larger budget wedding, because it felt more like we were just like increasing the grandeur and we weren't like, oh, we're having this massive party, now come to this other thing that's like small. So I wasn't worried from that extent. Since Rachel was talking about like deciding exact locations and whatnot, one thing that really resonated with us when we were planning at least the US wedding specifically was we prioritized 3 things. So the 3 things were nostalgia of the location, cost effectiveness, so like how expensive is that location generally, and then ease of transport. It was like the 5th place that we thought about when we landed on Pittsburgh. But once I think my mom was the one who suggested it. And we were like, oh, why don't we do Pittsburgh? But we had thought about like New England, and we'd thought about Hershey, Pennsylvania, because I have some relatives there. And we had thought about Vermont because my parents are there now. But either they were too expensive or they were challenging to get to. Or in the case of Hershey, it could have been cute, but we thought like our guests would be really bored staying in Hershey because it's like quickly just cornfields.
Yeah.
If you're not going to like Hershey Park or Chocolate World, then it's like very rural pretty fast. But Pittsburgh, the airport is like 30 minutes away from the venue. It's not challenging to get downtown. And most of the friends we were inviting were from college. So they were like having a pseudo like college reunion, which made it really exciting for them to come, which was super cool. And we had actually gone to a bar or 2 that we had gone to a lot in college while we were there, which was fun with all of our college friends. And people don't do destination weddings typically in Pittsburgh. So it was surprisingly like for what we created, I would say a pretty affordable wedding, which I'm like proud of.
Charlotte, did you have did a lot of your US friends that attended the Pittsburgh wedding like go to the India wedding?
Yeah, a lot did. It was particularly important to my husband, having grown up there and wanting his friends to experience like his Indian wedding. Well, our Indian wedding, but like his culture.
Yeah.
So I'd say he probably had maybe 80-ish% of the friends he invited come.
Which is a lot, yeah.
I think I probably had like closer to like 60. I think about like half of the bridesmaids that I had in Pittsburgh were able to attend, but like the large majority of our college friends, just because we're in a fortunate state that like people can afford to make that long flight, were able to attend. We also picked it over Thanksgiving.
I was just about to say, like, when it comes to like surviving the decision-making process, I think 2 things I really appreciate as guests to like destination weddings for you guys is you both picked dates that for like the majority of people, it worked, because Charlotte, yours was like over Thanksgiving weekend. So like you kind of already have that time off. And then Rachel, yours was like in the summertime, like, which I feel like it's just like a lot easier. Like everyone has like the like European summer. And again, I think for both of you, people also utilize that time to like travel. Like it wasn't like everyone came for the wedding, but then it wasn't just the wedding. I think at least for like majority of it. Do you think like when it comes to picking the date, that was something that was like, okay, find the venue and then find the date that worked? Or was that something, I don't know, I know like Charlotte, I don't know if like, you know, your husband's family had like certain dates that were important. I know like we have that as well. So like how do you guys come to the decision on like what is like the date of the weddings?
For Pittsburgh, we picked location and then made the date work. We wanted like the May-June window. We ended up doing a Sunday. Hack if you don't really care about like it being like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever. Sundays are way cheaper than Saturdays. I don't know that it was like that much cheaper, but we didn't have minimums that we would have had if we did Saturdays. That maybe would have like increased our budget a bit more. So it did require that like our guests took off work on Monday to travel unless they took like a really early flight. But we were okay with that because we wanted the location.
Yeah.
For India, we knew we wanted to do it over Thanksgiving because we wanted like the best chance of getting as many people from the US and elsewhere to come. And we thought that that would be the case. And yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about with the auspicious dates. We had a 3-day wedding and I think it was, what was it? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because like our actual wedding ceremony was on Thanksgiving Day. I had initially envisioned it being shifted farther. So it was maybe like Thursday, Friday, Saturday or something like that. In hindsight, it doesn't matter. It's like all Thanksgiving week. Yeah. But it wouldn't work for us to do that because I think it was like I'm like a noob as it pertains to this, but I think there was like a new moon or no moon or something that made it like auspiciously like bad. So we couldn't choose some of those days, but there was days within that the Thanksgiving window that worked. So it was all good. I'm not sure what we would have
more about these dates, Ishana.
I really
you explain it better.
No, I really don't know either. That's like I think the one thing we like asked the parents about was like what's a good date in this time frame. Yeah,
I think some people are strict even about like the time.
Yeah, some people like I feel like with Indian weddings too, it's like it'll be at like 3 a.m. in the morning because that's the time.
Yeah,
that works. Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah.
I don't know, Rachel, like, with the Jewish weddings, like,
not.
Okay.
So the only thing that we had to worry about, actually, with the Jewish wedding, which is a kind of funny anecdote, is typically when you have a rabbi do your ceremony, you have to be cognizant of Shabbat. Shabbat is sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, every Friday to Saturday sundown. And my sweet husband was when we were choosing dates. So I guess kind of to Charlotte's point, we had initially kind of had a thought of maybe doing like an April-May wedding. Ishana, one of our mutual other like best friends, she ended up getting married in April. And so it was like, okay, I'm not going to do my wedding like 1-2 right after her. So let's like buffer in a little time. So June ended up working and it worked for the venue, but specifically the date, my husband was like, we just have to be conscious of Shabbat. I was like, okay, no problem. And he had said, you know, we should get married because sundown in Paris in the summertime is like 9:30. He was like, we should probably do the wedding on a Friday and we can have the ceremony before sundown and then we can have our rabbi. And I'm like, yes, that sounds good. So we picked the date, we picked the venue, and then we figured out the rabbi situation. And when we started figuring out the Parisian rabbi we were going to get to facilitate, a few of them that we spoke with were like, that's great that you're doing a wedding on Friday, but like we have services, standing services at 6:30. And like, obviously you kind of have standing services. It's not like the Jews every week change their service based on when the sun goes down. So that was just a funny little side issue that we faced, but we ended up finding a rabbi who was retired. He was great, quite hilarious, but yeah.
He was funny. He made some funny comments.
He did. So we got married on a Friday, trying to be conscious of Shabbat, but in hindsight, you know, we probably could have gotten married on a Saturday after sundown at like 6:30 Saturday, but alas.
Yeah, you gotta do what you gotta do. And like the guests like make it work, honestly, I feel like. The last thing I want to talk about, like, in terms of this section, in terms of, like, surviving certain decisions, is obviously, like, the big thing is just, like, budget, reality versus, like, the dream. And I feel like because I'm, like, currently in it, that's something I'm, like, very much learning about. I'm just like, oh, shit, like, every single thing adds up, and then
Every single thing.
every single thing.
It's crazy.
And it's insane. And like, without getting into detail, specifically on budgets, but like, I don't know if this is one method me and my fiance are doing, is like, we kind of like pulled up an Excel list and we were like, these are all the potential vendors / categories we're going to need, from catering, food, hair and makeup, photographer, all of these things. And we kind of basically listed our priority of what is like the top 5 things for us. And we were able to narrow that down to like food and decor. Those are our top 2 things. When you're thinking about budget, because it always is higher than what you want it to be, do you guys have those conversations on like, what are the things we might be willing to spend a little bit more on, and what are the things that we're just like, don't really care, this can be like a more local thing? Like, how do you guys go through the budgeting process when it came to all these different vendors?
I feel like this question resonates more with our Pittsburgh wedding for me. There were some things that we ended up cutting because like we did have like a pretty concrete budget with like a little buffer that we were okay. So we were aiming for like the low end of our budget. We obviously hit like the high end of our budget because that's what happens when you plan a wedding. But there was a couple things that did get cut off the list that we were like, we don't value it at its cost. One of those was a videographer. So like we had a photographer. Our photographer was actually the photographer we used when Karan had planned his proposal to me. He booked a photo shoot basically. And we initially wanted a videographer, but then realized how expensive it was. So we decided against it, but we still wanted to capture video. So we had like family or friends like kind of responsible at different parts of the wedding to whip out their iPhone and to capture either just like the ceremony from like a tripod or like the first dances from like a tripod, things like that. And I don't know in hindsight whether I regret that or not, but that got X-nayed. I think video, like professional video footage would be sick to have, but I didn't value it at the time for its cost.
Because you kind of compromised the videographer thing, was that something that just like was cut, or was that because of some other category that you were kind of like weighing more?
That's because everything's more expensive than you think.
It's so true.
Like literally everything.
So true.
Everybody says flowers are expensive, but like I didn't want that many florals. I really didn't. Like I didn't need like florals decorating the walls or anything like that. I wanted bouquets and maybe some like small florals on the table. Still expensive. But I found like a florist that I liked within Pittsburgh who was on the lower budget end, which was great because I didn't want to do like the cheapest budget end of like pick up your flowers from Costco and then like arrange them yourselves. I like could not cognitively like, I'm trying to get married this morning. I'm not making bouquets. So I wasn't doing that. So things were more expensive. The one thing that surprised me the most with things that like surprise costs was lighting because we were getting married indoors. So I kind of just assumed like, I don't need to pay for lighting. We're inside somewhere. And that's where we splurged a little bit more. And I don't regret that at all because although I do think it's ridiculous and predatory that it costs this much because the lights are permanently installed. They don't remove them. So we're not paying for somebody to like install these like fancy can lights or anything. Like they have a partnership with the location such that these lights are always installed and we're just paying for some dude to stand there and press a button on an iPad like once or twice throughout the whole wedding. So I'm like, wow, this is insane. But we had the lighting change from like the first dance and dinner time where it was like spotlights on the tables and on the dance floor to mood lighting once dancing started to like darker blue. And I'm so glad we did because I don't think the dancing and like all of the fun would have been as fun and as vibey if we had that like harsh light. We were debating cutting the blue light and I'm so glad we didn't because it just like made it more sort of like clubby vibes. We went hard on the dance floor. So it was a party.
This is true. No, that makes sense. Rachel, I know that you guys kind of had different priorities just from some of our conversations and I know like budget is always a conversation. What were certain things that you really prioritized and what were things that you were just kind of like, we have to nix this or we have to like find a balance?
Definitely for both my husband and myself, like we're huge foodies. So that was definitely something we were willing to splurge on, like relative to the rest of the budget. I think, Charlotte, to your point, it's crazy how like there's so many random things that you don't even consider that add up. I mean, like a very kind of an anecdote to your lighting. The one nice thing was the venue we chose, like the lighting, and they kind of did like a package. Like they're a wedding venue, so that was helpful for, I think, a lot of the like super small things. We didn't have to worry about like someone standing on an iPad and like pressing buttons, like not that, but it was interesting. Like we had initially wanted our reception to be outside because it was June, Paris. It's like great time to have an outdoor dinner, whatever. So we had little tea lights that our wedding planner said, you know, if you want to do this, it's going to be, I don't know, it was like a few €100. And I was like, hundreds of euros for some tea lights that I could buy at Costco? Like, okay. But it's just little things like that where it's like, I don't know, there was constantly like those things would come up. But in terms of compromising, I think that the one nice thing about doing the destination and picking the venue we picked was, Ishana, to your point about decor, like that was something we didn't really have to spend money on because the venue was just like a beautiful old chateau. And that was kind of like, that's the mic drop. You're good. But yeah, I think the food was definitely a priority. I mean, the florals, it was nice. And I think not all US venues allow you to do this, but you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But like our planner and the venue were really great about letting us take the flowers we used from the ceremony and then like moving them to the tables or wherever we wanted them to be. We, due to weather, ended up having to go with a plan B option, which we can get into plan A's and plan B's, but we had to go with our plan B and we did dinner inside. But like they were able to move all the flowers inside. So we were able to save costs there. I mean, with the decor piece, like we didn't spend extra on like wedding. Yeah, I have friends that have done like wedding china for their tablescapes, and I've seen that on Instagram, and I've had friends do that at their weddings of doing like the monogrammed menus and all of that stuff. I'd say like that was kind of an area we were less concerned about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's like every couple has their priorities, and I think, you know, for people listening, whether they're planning a wedding or like hoping to get married, like that's just like an inevitable part that like unless your budget is literally balls to the walls, like you have to make compromises, and that's just like the reality of it. So we talked about like the surviving certain decisions and vendors. Now I want to shift a little bit into like surviving the people and like opinions and family dynamics. And I feel like that's also a whole other bucket in itself. And like maybe the first area we can talk about is just managing your guest list and guests itself. Rachel, you mentioned earlier, you know, that you guys knew you wanted like an intimate, it was about like 70 people wedding. How did you guys go about creating your guest list? I know a big thing right now we're talking about is like, what's the +1 rule? Like, how are we going to establish that? So maybe if you want to give into like your tips and kind of way about managing the guests.
Yeah, definitely wanted a smaller wedding. I mean, admittedly, when we were initially starting wedding planning, it was like, we're going to have a 50-person wedding. Like, that's great. Which, I mean, we're very thankful for everyone that came to the wedding.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think so for starters, the one benefit of having a smaller wedding was, for the most part, my husband's family is slightly larger, but I'm an only child. Like, our family is just very small. So that helps. I mean, I have friends who just the family alone is like 40 people. Ishana, your family alone is like 100. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, so that was definitely like a helpful starting point. I think that, yeah, when it came to the guest list, I mean, really the one rule that we were super strict on, I mean, and this even stretched like to siblings basically and step siblings, was if you're not engaged, married, or living with your significant other, you don't get a +1. And I think that there definitely were some tough conversations that were had with certain people. And at the end of the day, I think like people did respect, you know, it's not your wedding. Like it's not for you. And that is another debate of like, are weddings for you and your partner, or are they for like your guests? And I think that that is a balance you constantly have to play like in wedding planning. But I think for us, it was like, we're standing pretty firm on the fact that like, this is how we want our day to be. And we want the day to be filled with people that have been in our lives for a long time and will continue to be in our lives. And I think when you start getting into a plus one, it's like, well, if those people break up in 6 months, then that was just another person at my wedding that I'm never going to see again. So I think that we were pretty strict on that rule. And I think it ended up being fine. And people respected it. And there was 1 or 2 people that didn't respect it and they didn't come. And that's totally their decision. And that's okay.
What about for you, Charlotte, between your Pittsburgh and India wedding guest list?
I like to hear that Rachel was also kind of strict with plus ones because I feel like it's still kind of taboo, but we were also pretty darn strict. You were smart in having like a concrete rule of like engaged, married, or living together. Ours was more wishy-washy where it was like, man, this sounds bad. But basically, I guess we were just judging the seriousness of the relationship. Is what it came down to, or like how new it was. But we had quite a few friends that were either single or in brand new relationships, and they didn't get plus ones. Yeah. And that's true for both Pittsburgh and India. As it pertained to family, like we knew that it was going to be like my family heavy in Pittsburgh and Karen's family heavy in India. I glossed over that, but that was a large reason why we had to, is because we knew we weren't going to pick one place in this world and get all of the people we wanted to show up. Like, so instead of like making all the people move, we moved and had 2 weddings. So like pretty much all the family of my family we invited to the Pittsburgh wedding, and his like very immediate close family we invited to Pittsburgh. And then for India, we did the reverse, where it was like my super close relatives we invited to India, and all of his family that warranted like an invite or whatnot got invited to India. I think guest lists are also interesting culturally because there's the Eastern mindset and the Western mindset. Pittsburgh, I think we looked at it a little bit more from the lens of like who we want at our wedding, with a little bit of input from mine and his parents about who should or should not get invited. But that was a more our call. As it pertained to our Indian wedding, there was an understanding. Like Karen's parents also have people on the guest list that they expect to be there, and that we both totally understood. I think culturally it's more expected that like, oh, if we were invited to this person's wedding, how could we not invite them to our wedding? So we had an allocated amount of people like that we divided sort of for the Indian wedding. Like you get X number of people, you get X number of people, you get X number of people. Obviously then we have like a list, and then it becomes more blurry. Like, does this person belong to you or belong to me and my count? We ended up having, as an Indian wedding goes, a more intimate Indian wedding. And when I was thinking about this, I was trying to think about how many people we actually had, and I'm starting to forget how many people we had at our wedding, which is crazy. But it was small-ish for Indian standards. So we actually had a pre-reception in Mumbai for people who weren't going to be invited to our wedding in Udaipur, such that we didn't have an issue of like not extending an invite to people who maybe would feel some type of way if they weren't invited. And that allowed us to have the venue that we wanted that was more intimate, but also make sure that we weren't accidentally offending people in my husband's like world and society and whatnot. So
Charlotte,
it worked out.
I think an interesting point that you bring up that I think a lot of people have to navigate, Ishana, I'm sure. I mean, you guys are working through a guest list things, but yeah, I think that the piece, Charlotte, that you totally hit the nail on the head with is like the parents and the parents' involvement, which I did not hit on. I mean, my husband's parents are divorced and both remarried, so it's like there was definitely a lot of, I mean, everyone for the most part, we were lucked out. Like we could have had way more opinions in the mix, but I definitely think any engaged couple, like that is a huge piece of the planning process, and definitely something to not gloss over is the guest list can be quite contentious.
Yeah. I'm pausing because that is definitely something like we are talking about in a way where it's like, I think between me and my partner, it's like we have our own conversations, we have our own guest list, our parents have our own, and then there's also like a number we're trying to maintain, and then it's like there is no formula to like, to Charlotte's point, like how do you define like the relationship and like the seriousness between people? And I think because I've now have entered that era of a lot of people getting married too, it's like, oh, I was invited to their wedding, so I have to reciprocate that. And there's just a lot of moving pieces. So good luck to like other people that are also doing this. Okay, I want to do something a little bit more fun that's like a rapid fire survival edition in terms of the wedding itself. So I'll ask you guys both a question, and I kind of want you to just give a one-word answer or one-sentence answer based off of the question. So what is one word to describe the wedding planning process?
Stressful.
Okay.
I was going to say, oof.
Okay. That's fair.
I think build up. That's going to be my word. Yep.
Okay. What was your favorite moment from your weddings?
Reciting my vows in Hindi and surprising everybody in Pittsburgh.
Oh my God, I was bawling. I was bawling.
Yeah,
That was
I
good.
love doing that.
Yeah, I was going to say the vows. Definitely. Doing that in front of, going back to the earlier piece of the ceremony, like that, very important to me.
How many hours of sleep would you say you got during the wedding weekend?
I ended up sick after both of my weddings.
Makes sense.
I was exhausted.
Like the night before, admittedly, I had written my vows on my phone and I was like, I can't have my phone at the ceremony, so I need to start transcribing them on a notepad. So that took me too long.
I feel like one thing no one talks about, I think especially like for girls and brides having to get married, is like the wake up time for hair and makeup is like insane. Almost critical. Okay, last question with this is, what's one thing that went wrong during the wedding or wedding weekend in hindsight that like didn't really matter, but in the moment felt like, oh shit, this is a disaster?
At our Mahindi, we had like a combined Haldi Mahindi. Those are two like separate ceremonies a lot of the time. I won't get into trying to explain them because I'll butcher it. But we combined them and we had a wardrobe change. And my parents assumed the event was over when we left. Even though like we had told them like this is happening, there was so many different events for our wedding, so many different outfits that it was hard for them to keep track of what's what. So we had left, so they assumed the event was over, but we had just left to change. They had gone back to their room, and wedding venue was like this complex. So it wasn't just like a hotel with like rooms all close by that you had to take a golf cart to get to the places. So then when we started to try to do the Haldi ceremony, they weren't anywhere to be found. And we needed then to figure around to like initiate putting Haldi on me and my husband. And we were like, where were they? So we were trying to find them. And I was like, oh my gosh, where are they? What is going on? So it felt very chaotic, but we sorted it out. They came down. It was a blast. But at the time, I was highly stressed.
Naturally. Rach, what about for you?
I'd say we had like two big kind of blow-ups. One I didn't know about until the next day, which, you know, for all the husbands listening, sometimes that's the best. Like, don't tell your bride. Ryan, my husband, he got a call an hour before our ceremony was supposed to start, and maybe an hour and a half. And our venue was about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Paris, from our rabbi basically saying like we had transportation scheduled for him and he was going to be brought in and whatever. And the rabbi called him just not that far before our ceremony was supposed to begin, basically saying like, I don't have a car. Like, I don't know where your car is to come get me. So the rabbi made it on time, but it was, I didn't even know that had happened until the next day. So that's kind of funny. And then the other one I'd say was the weather, which goes back to the whole like plan A, plan B. I think it's always good to have a plan B. I mean, it was crazy. Like the week after our wedding occurred, I think it was maybe 90 degrees in Paris, but like it just so happened that the week we got married, it was like overcast and a bit rainy. And so we ended up pivoting and doing our reception inside. But yeah, the whole time we were having our ceremony outside, I was like, fingers crossed, please don't rain on the guests, because we don't have a plan B for the ceremony.
Weather is like such a big thing that's like so anxiety inducing. And it's like, both of you had outside events in general. And even for like me, I'm like, outside is obviously always more pretty, but it's like, do I want to be that person that's like having so much anxiety over like predicting the weather a year out? And that can be a topic for another thing of just like managing weather and anxieties and like things that you can control and can't control, but hear you on that. So as we wrap up this episode, I think there are probably going to be people that are going through the wedding planning process like myself or eventually will. And I think a big thing that I'd love to get your guys' like tips and takes on is just support system and what actually helps survive this process. I think one thing from my experience has been like having a wedding planner who does manage it. I know not everyone chooses to do that or can afford to do that, but that has really helped just like keep me in check and keep us aligned. I think also another boundary that my partner and I have set is there are certain times that we do wedding planning, and then there are certain times where we just don't talk about it at all. And that was a conversation we had recently because it was just becoming to the point where every time that we spent was that, and it was just like, it was not a fun thing. So, and I think another thing I've done is like lean on people and friends like you guys who've gone through it and can get it. So I don't know if any of that resonates with you guys, but how do you feel like you were able to survive your wedding planning process, and tips for anyone going forward?
Ish, to your point about like leaning on friends, it just so happened, like I was saying earlier in the episode, like one of our mutual like other best friends, she got married shortly before I did. So we did have so many things that we were doing like throughout the wedding planning process that kind of lined up. So it was really nice to kind of have just a friend support to say like, oh my gosh, wedding dress fittings. Like that was a whole thing. And, you know, everyone has different experiences. My wedding dress shopping experience was like not a good one. We figured it out, but you know, it's like, it's just, you have an idea in your head of how it's going to go and whatever. So I think, yeah, the wedding planner, again, not budgets and there's constraints and totally understood. We were fortunate that the venue we chose, like that was part of kind of the quote package. Like we had the planner already in-house, especially with an international wedding. Charlotte, I don't know if this happened with you planning the India one, but I know that for us it was great because my husband and I don't speak French, and that's a one. And then two, I mean, everything, just the time zones. So that was an interesting kind of other battle or just other obstacle to get through. So having a planner, I think, especially for an international or a destination wedding, is a huge plus. And then, yeah, really just besides the friends, family, and then other people that have gone through it. I had coworkers that got married, you know, 8 months, a year before me. So I was asking them all the questions, is this how much this should cost? And they're like, yes, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Well, I feel like I came off this podcast as being jaded about wedding planning. Honestly, I will say it was worth it. I'd do it again. I love both of our weddings, and they were like some of the best days of my life. So I think that's like the light at the end of the tunnel you know that you're going to have those days and it's going to be worth it. And I think that kept me sane. I wish that we had had the idea of having like wedding planning hours and not wedding planning hours, because it truly was our life. From getting engaged to having our weddings was like all we talked about. And I think that was not healthy. So I love that you guys have boundaries of when and when not to. And I wish that we had come up with that idea. But yeah, it was worth it. It is totally worth it. I would do it again. I think that better stress management would have been helpful. But I just run worried, you know?
Yeah.
I'm a stressed person. So that's just like in my nature. I don't know. I don't have the best advice for staying calm. I think you're maybe handling it better than I.
No, I don't. I know I've had my fair share of breakdowns. And I think one thing, like, this podcast is aimed at like working women navigating very busy lives. And this is like a full-time job to wedding planning, whether you have a wedding planner or not. And I think like we have to give ourselves credit of like we are doing the best that we can when there's jobs where like everyone's running marathons, like including all of us. So, you know, like there's a lot that's going on in life. So I think like in general, my takeaway from this is like wedding planning looks different for everyone, and everyone's culture, everyone's way of wanting to do a wedding is different. And if anything, it just feels more validating that like all of us have felt the very high highs and the very, very lows like of this process.
I think too, like going back to what the one word to describe the planning process was, I think that for me, looking back in Charlotte, I don't know if you feel this way, because I guess if the wedding was many days, maybe it's different, but I feel like looking back, it's just so crazy that you spend a year, 18 months, maybe 24 months. You spend so much time and effort and energy anxiety and fear and whatever into this like day or a few days. And I think like my takeaway and advice-ish while you go through this is just know that like it goes by so fast that I would keep that into perspective of things that might seem like really big or, you know, these big decisions or is a guest gonna like this versus that. I think at the end of the day, it's like, it's your day, the reason you're getting married. And that's what I definitely had to remind myself throughout the process is it's like, this is a celebration of like love and unity between like you and your partner. At the end of the day, nothing else matters. And the people that are gonna be there are there to celebrate your love. And it also just goes by so fast. It goes by so fast. And then you wake up the next day with a wedding band on your finger and you're like, okay, well,
This happened.
that happened and now what?
Yeah.
So I would just say like, that's my last piece of advice is I look back on that day as Charlotte, to your point, it was like one of the best days of my life, but it goes by in the blink of an eye. So I'll leave you with that.
Thanks everyone for listening to 3 Takes. This was a really fun episode for me, being able to be with 2 of my close friends and also personally going through this wedding planning process as well. And we'd love to hear from any of the listeners or anyone out there who maybe has other advice for other brides or partners going through the wedding planning process or any other questions that you have. Maybe we'll do a part 2 or a mini series on the wedding planning process. So feel free to reach out to us at 3takes.com, at 3takes on our Instagram, or connect at 3takes.com.
Thanks for joining us on 3 Takes. If something we shared sparked a new thought or opened up a conversation with someone you love, we want to hear about it. DM us on Instagram at 3takes, email us at connect@3takes.com, or visit us at www.3takes.com. And if this episode meant something to you, share it with another mother, daughter, or sister in your life. It's how we grow and keep the stories moving.